Thank you very much. I just want to start, and then I'll go to my board members, just on the student disruption and demonstration, since I had brought it forward, and I appreciate members of the board supporting that. And thank you to Mr. Parento, Mr. Connor, and Mr. Duggan. There was a lot of work on this. I don't need to probably tell anyone here that this is not just in Sarasota as a offensive component. I'm grateful that we haven't needed to do it, whereas many other places across the state and country have had to take action. So I'm glad that we are proactive in this. But once again, I find us leading the way because there are many districts who have taken note of what we're doing here and asked for our final draft when we're completed, and I just want to put that on record. And so again, thank you for that work. I know that Tinker is obviously going to be raised regularly, and I believe this is sufficient, but I'm going to defer to Mr. Duggan if you can make a couple comments on that.
Sure, yes. So anytime we have any of the discussions about the First Amendment, whether it's the speech in this boardroom, the speech that's outside of this boardroom, student journalism, disruptions on campus, and about 100 other things, you're always looking at balancing of rights under the First Amendment. When you participate in government, depending on how you're doing it, you have the right to express yourself in this country, and we, to some degree, must permit it, but depending on the type of forum that it is, our ability to regulate differs, depending on the circumstances. In this particular forum, we are trying to balance the right for students to be able to express themselves in a lawful way against our legitimate needs to educate kids, to have kids remain safe, to have them in the classroom, to have our school rules followed. So I believe this policy balances those two things in a reasonable way, where kids can still express themselves, where organizations can participate, but not in an unlimited way, where teachers can express themselves within the bounds of the First Amendment. And those things tend to give way, and in this policy do give way to when there's a disruption. So when you look at this policy, the speech only becomes a violation of the rules when it constitutes disruptive conduct, and we have defined that to essentially mean materially and substantially interfering with classroom instruction, school-sponsored events, the orderly operation of the school, the rights and safety of others. And again, that's regardless of the viewpoint, because in government, you're required to be content neutral, meaning you can't pick and choose the whether you allow the speech based on whether you agree with the content of it or not. And we are doing that in a way where there is a disruption or a reasonable, likely disruption based on what the speech is. And that is researched. I believe this policy is consistent with the First Amendment restrictions, like we do with any policy. A lot goes into putting these together to make sure we're balancing those things in a way where if they're challenged, then they hopefully will pass legal scrutiny, which I think this one would. And then, of course, always, it's not just what the paper says or what the policy says, it is how we apply it in practice. I believe this is facially on its face lawful and constitutional, and depending on how we apply it moving forward, I think that's really where you see a lot of the challenges as applied. As long as we follow this with consistency, I think it will be constitutional and lawful as applied as well.
Perfect, thank you. One other thing is just as I anticipate potentially, because there was a reference to the current student code of conduct and what exists currently, there is a difference in here as well. Particularly, I want to note on Section 7, it's outside organizations and third-party involvement. I believe that is critically important and something that is unique. We do not have something that lists that out. And I'm going to just speak straightforward, is that if you look around the country and our state, and even from a historical component, when we have had attempts for student walkouts, it almost always includes some kind of third-party organization that is helping facilitate that. And I wanted to make sure we emphasize that. If anyone is partnering, has the privilege of partnering with our school district, yet believes that it's incumbent upon them to make a statement that would be disruptive to our core mission, which is academics, I do not believe they should any longer have that privilege to partner with us. And so that does address that as well. So that is something also unique. Finally, when it comes to the organization, is there an elevated consequence for students if they are found to be the ones organizing the disruption? I don't know if that's Mr. Connor or Mr. Parento.
I do believe that was a discussion at the last workshop regarding that. So what I would recommend is that we would begin with a level 2 infraction for that. And we have a current code around severe inappropriate activity that we could incorporate the language that if you were to organize a disruption on campus, that would apply for that specific code.
Perfect.
So
And
I
so,
think-
and because we are also doing student code of conduct, so we'll just make sure that lines up correctly. And if there are any amendments that need to be made, although it doesn't appear that that is the case, that can be strengthened when it comes back to the board. Is that accurate? Okay, I'll open up to comments. Thank you again. Mrs. Marinelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to carry that discussion further from a historical point of view. I was still working, and we had a walkout at one of our high schools that was planned, and it was during the school day, and the students went out onto the sidewalk, and it was very disruptive. And the community, those that drive up and down Proctor Road, went nuts because they were like, what are you doing as a school district? So I applaud you for finally doing this. This should have been done over 11 years ago when we had that walkout. And Mrs. Ziegler was the only person on the board at that time. Two of us were still working, and I don't believe two people, and that's not, they hadn't moved here yet, so don't have that historical background of why it's so important that we have these rules in place, because the community overall wants students in class learning. If they want to protest, they can do it after school. They can do it on Saturdays or Sundays, like many other protests. But I want it clear that this board is not being punitive. This should have been done years ago when we had walkouts going on at that time. So I appreciate very much that that now this is in policy and everybody will know what the rules are. Because I think when everybody knows what the rules are, it's a level playing field as long as the rules are applied evenly across the board. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much for those clarifications and questions. Mrs. Rose, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Relative to the proposed, the new policy, for me, that is very much about safety. And I would like consideration for communication to be very effective to all students, parents, and staff upon approval of this, if and when that occurs. Right now, it's a proposal. Given that we have local organizations that attend these board meetings that have strongly enlisted students and encourage students to participate in protests during the school day. So what I don't want to occur is for students to not be safe. The safest place and most productive place is learning in the classroom. But I also don't want anyone to say that we don't regularly look at these kinds of things to see updates on the website. I think this is so important from a safety standpoint and from a academic learning standpoint that I would like consideration if my colleagues are interested in some very direct, effective communication where we can be assured that our community is aware of what is the best place for a student to be, and that is in the classroom learning, and ultimately the safest place. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree. I think that it is important. I do want to make note that this was something I brought up back in November, and it was broadly for a variety of reasons. It just happens to be hitting a tipping point right now, but that was certainly not the initial driving force of it. It just shows the timeliness and necessity of it. As Mrs. Marinelli mentioned, it was back post Parkland. There were a number of demonstrations across the country, and one thing that I do want to note, because safety is at the core of this, as is our role of educating, that there are real risk factors. And so what had transpired back then, I know many of you were here, and Mrs. Marinelli referenced this, is that there was the instinct for administrators to say, I'd rather keep them safe, so then they participate in the organizing of that said demonstration. And again, this is so important. It doesn't matter what it is about. It cannot happen either way, because once you allow it for one, you're going to have to allow it for another, or we walk into a very, very challenging situation. And anytime we're not doing instruction, our children are not learning, and then we are not doing our core purpose. So I do want to ask Mr. Connor, as it pertains to the the direction to administrators, and the way this policy reads, that would not be allowed as what took place back. And I know Sarasota County was not the only one. We even see this happening now with the current state of affairs, with administrators, not in our county, but saying, oh, I don't want kids walking out, so instead we're just going to help facilitate this demonstration. According to this policy, that would not be allowed. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'll direct you to the first sentence. It is our primary responsibility to maintain a safe, orderly environment for all students and staff and to ensure that instructional time are not disrupted.
Okay.
And so that is the primary function of why we're at school. So any day-to-day operational requirements from administrators or expectations should follow suit to protect instructional time.
Well, I'm going to play now instructional time versus bell to bell. There's a little bit of a difference because if I remember correctly, and I'm just using what my experience was, they tried to utilize lunch period, which does stagger, by the way, but how would that apply as it stands currently, and do there need to be amendments? I don't know if that's...
Yeah, I do understand there's a lot of hypotheticals. I'll cut it. Administrators will not be helping facilitate any disruptions on campus.
Thank you very much. And finally, I do support, just for clarity purposes, so everyone understands, and again, this applies to every single district at all times. It's not specific to any current event. I do think it is worthy upon adoption that there will be a communication so that there is clarity and that they understand consequences. Level 2, level 3, what is a level 2 infraction? I don't know if that's Mr. or...
It does depend. It's still a local infraction for the most part. It's not a assessor state reported infraction. It is obviously more serious of an infraction than, say, a level 1, maybe seems class or something like that. So a level 2 is just an escalation of consequences. So you'll begin to see as our matrix is built out based on occurrence. So between the first and second and third occurrence, those consequences escalate from there as well. So you're starting at a tiered approach, right? Level 1 are going to be more low-level types of consequences. Level 2s will increase in the severity of those consequences as you move up the chain. And remember, it has to... I always say the punishment fits the crime, right? So you have to assess the level at which those infractions are disruptive and what they're doing to the campus to determine the appropriate aligned consequence.
Understood. Thank you. I have Mrs. Barker. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have a couple questions. When I'm looking at the granting permission for students to leave the school campus, and I'm looking at the new proposed policy, it does say that students may leave school grounds with written consent from the student's parent or guardian as defined by Florida statutes. And I see that originally it looks like there was a phrase saying provided an acceptable reason is established, but that has been struck because then that would mean you couldn't ever leave the school without excused absence, correct? So you couldn't leave school to go to a college visit, for example. But just want to confirm that that has in fact been struck and we intend to keep that struck.
So that was done to align with the definitions that we put in the attendance policy for excused versus unexcused absences. Obviously, a parent comes to school to pick up their child. We're not going to say that's not an acceptable reason for you to take your child. Right.
So just wanted to make sure.
That was part of the reason that was removed.
So that is permanently struck. Good. Okay, so my other question is here on the definitions under Part 1, it says, talking about a demonstration, it says on school property, at school-sponsored activities, or during the school day. So let me ask this. Does that mean, let's say, a parent signs their student out so that they can attend a protest in Tallahassee that is during the school day? Is it then our administrator's responsibility to find that out and punish that student because it happened during the school day? Because this says or during the school day.
No, these are for on-campus disruptions, demonstrations, and disruptive conduct.
Okay.
To that point, I'll note that this particular forum for First Amendment purposes is a different type of forum than a school. A public meeting where people are permitted to come and picket or protest or speak and come in and we invite them to give public comment. That's a different analysis. Different criteria would go into any regulations that go to that. We have a lot more leeway when a disruption happens on a school campus, and our need to keep kids safe, the fact that we take thousands of kids in every day and we need to get them to and from class and educate them. We have more ability to regulate speech in that forum than you would in this particular forum, or that, for example, like a picket in Tallahassee or something like that would have. There's a difference between inside the building, outside of the building, the sidewalk versus the parking versus the board meeting. I just want to make that clear.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That leads me obviously to my next question based on what we've seen. School board meetings then. So if a parent signs their student out to attend a school board meeting, is that a punishable offense?
Well, it wouldn't be under this policy applies to on-campus demonstrations, this new policy. There's a lot of what ifs into that. If we are permitting parents to sign kids out, I think that, I think there's certainly a way for them to violate school board policy while here, but it generally wouldn't be under this policy.
Okay.
I think generally, my understanding is if the parent signs them out, then they are here. I don't know if it gets into, is that an excused absence versus an unexcused absence?
That is an unexcused.
Okay,
That
so
I
that would be an
understand.
unexcused absence, so that would be a violation,
got
but
you
it wouldn't necessarily, it would be a violation of something else, it wouldn't be a violation of this policy.
Okay, so even though we are on school property, or are we only talking about the physical school? This is what we're dealing with, right? So we should be very clear.
Yeah, so that would be, as Mr. Duggan said, outside the scope of this policy. That would be more of a student attendance excused versus unexcused absence type thing. And then to his point about the level of flexibility that we have in terms of regulating things in the parking lot here prior to a board meeting versus in the courtyard of one of our school campuses.
Okay, forgive me, just to be very, very clear. If a student is signed out by their parent and they come to a school board meeting and attend a rally on the sidewalk or in the parking lot of our school board chambers, are there additional punishments that can be levied for that student under this new policy?
That would get into the level of
I would say-
disruption in the legal standard.
I would say not under this policy specifically. If somebody threw a rock through the window or something like that, there's 100 ways under the Code of Student Conduct it would violate other policies, but this policy is geared towards school events on school campuses.
Okay.
And it would be a different First Amendment analysis for things that happen here, but I think there is some overlapping of the Code of Student Conduct. Obviously here, if you're a student, you have to be following generally the rules if you're on school property, but it wouldn't fall under this analysis. It would fall under a different analysis, and it would fall under, just because the First Amendment regulations for a school board meeting where we invite members of the public to come and essentially petition their government, it's a different legal analysis than this, and there's frankly probably more leeway at a board meeting than there would be to school. We have more ability to control school functions for safety and education needs. This would be a different forum and a different analysis because of that.
Okay.
But to answer your question, I think you could come here as a student and do a number of things that would violate the Code of Student Conduct. It just wouldn't necessarily fall under this particular policy because this is for school activities on campus, athletic events, that type of thing, not school board meetings.
Thank you for that clarification. So then that begs the question, what are the material differences in this policy from what we already have in the Student Code of Conduct?
I think that the big differences would be putting clear definitions on things so that they can be consistently implemented, right? If we just say, oh, that's disruptive conduct, my perception of disruptive conduct and yours may be totally different, and I may try to enforce that this was disruptive conduct when it may not actually be within this definition on here, that it materially and substantially interferes with the instruction, the orderly operation, the rights or safety of others.
Okay.
To add to that, I think, and I'll look to Ms. Ziegler because I know this was something that you originated, that the way that I perceived this conversation at the workshop previously and why we brought forth this policy was that it was the board's desire to codify this specifically into policy. I do believe, to your point, many of the things that we currently have in place are addressed, that are already in place and consistent with what we do in practice. One of the things that we haven't ever, or we don't have necessarily codified, is Section 7 around outside organizations and third-party involvement. But this really just pulls together all of those pieces related to this specific topic around demonstrations, walkouts, and so forth. Is that, and I'll look to Ms. Ziegler to say that was what I interpreted as the intent of the board to ask for this policy.
Yes, correct. And I think that because, and as I mentioned, the student code of conduct being referenced, and in the event there needs to be any elevated language as we fine tune that coming forward to the board this year, that would be addressed. But as it stands right now, there are a lot of nuances, even in this scenario that was just articulated, but codifying this to make it very clear. And as Mr. Connor said, the level of disruption, you evaluate it, but those components aligned to this disruptive behavior and those demonstrations being that they are disruptive. So there is clarity and transparency around what our expectations are, what our rules are, and what those consequences are. And if I may, just beyond that, just want to address what you had mentioned, because I think that's a very good question. And I was thinking if we change the language to, what your assigned school location is, but, that gets a little muddy. As Mr. Duggan said, a public the board chambers is different than the administrative buildings, right? If a student gets signed out by their parent because they want to go storm Mr. Connor's office, that is very different, right? And I think that's important, and that's why those nuances are clearly articulated here. But we understand, because that the time, place, and manner components are different when it comes to, even though it still applies, it is the First Amendment protections are broader when it comes to inside here, because you're petitioning your government, or even when you're talking about demonstrating. And again, then there's different components when you talk about trespassing or what have you. And all of those exist within the confines of the definition factors. But this makes it crystal clear that they're, when they are disruptive during the school day, they're organized by either a staff member, a student, a third party organization, or any kind of combination of the like, that there are aligned consequences.
Okay. Thank you.
You're going to have a little more leeway from the First Amendment standpoint at a board meeting, complaining about what we all do here. Then the school would have a little bit more ability to rein that in out of the legitimate need to keep everybody safe, to prevent disruptions. For example, you could wear perhaps different clothing here that's expressive than perhaps we would admit it, or that we would allow in the school. Just because if you wore a message on a shirt, it could incite a riot at the school, and we have a little bit more discretion and ability to regulate that to keep every kid safe and educated and physically and mentally healthy in the context of taking kids in and educating them during the school day. I think you have a little bit more leeway in this chamber to express yourself, as one example. I think under both, though, there's a way that you could do it where it was egregious within each of those forums, where it would be a violation of the student code of conduct still. I think there's a little more leeway here than at school.
Thank you. Mrs. Marinelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just also want to bring out that what happens, and it is fact, I'm not making it up, that students that choose not to participate in any of these protests, they get bullied, and that fits the definition because it's systemic and it continues. They're verbally chastised for not joining. They can be sometimes physically nudged in hallways and things that happen. So that's why everything needs to be codified and really in place, so that does not happen to students that do not choose to participate in anything. So this is a big issue. It's just not about, do kids have the right to protest? Yeah, they do, just not during school time or on school grounds. So it's just a bigger issue, and that this part never really gets talked about. And sometimes it's encouraged by certain staff members, and we know that goes on. And that's where Mr. Connor, because this board, we don't get into the day-to-day operations of a school, but we do get parent complaints to us, and I just send them right, I acknowledge it, send it right to Superintendent Connor. But this is one of the things that does go on in our schools to children who don't want anything to do with that. They're there to study. So I just wanted to bring that up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards.
Before I even say what I want to say, just because a board member says something about staff members, imaginary or perceived or otherwise, that does not make it so.
Excuse me. I'm done with that.
You have the floor, Mr. Edwards. Go ahead.
Thank you. The same goes for students. Just because somebody says that happens doesn't make it so. And I work very closely with the superintendent and the administration and ask those questions on an ongoing basis, because the other side happens frequently in and around, let's say, Turning Point USA, that it could be perceived that staff members lean one way or the other. And I know for a fact, after having many conversations with Mr. Connor, that that doesn't happen. The school administrators and the superintendent and the cabinet make it very clear, to my knowledge, that that is not to occur. So I don't like those comments and then have it perceived that it is so. But I did note, and I appreciate that we spent about a fair amount of time in this one particular policy. And as I read through what was and what is, the distinction is the third party association making a protest that finds its way into schools. And so all of this time, all of this effort into that specific thing in and around a new topic, which is protest. So there's a new topic and the delineation of third parties. Everything else in my mind was covered and had been covered. But what I want to also point out is that it is my perception, and I want to be very clear so that people don't think just because I say it, it's so. But it is my perception that this board majority has been driving to eliminate the opposition voices that are very clear. So they've done it from meeting times to policies to now protests. And it's all of the things that have taken up an extraordinary amount of time when I would much rather be talking about the budget. And I think that is significantly more important for not just me, but for the community and for our educational outcomes. And so because of that, I will not be supporting this one policy.
Thank you so much. I'll conclude with, I believe this is imperative for a number of reasons, and actually it does align quite nicely to the conversation we're about to go into, which is our financial situation, which is incredibly important, which does demand our attention. But there is a clear concern, not just in here, not just in Florida, across the country, but I'll focus right here, is that it is our responsibility to be focused on academics and safety. And this policy makes it abundantly clear where this district stands and what those expectations are for administrators, for staff members, for students, and for parents to understand that that is a priority to us. That kind of statement actually plays a huge role in people, when you're a parent, looking at what kind of school district you want to send your child to. Do you want to send your child to one that supports kind of activism, or do you want one that makes a very clear statement that we will not tolerate any kind of political statements on any side at any time, and we will hold everyone accountable equally to that, because they are disruptive, because our students need every moment. Our staff have always say that they need more time, so we will not allow any of these things. There is a real issue happening across the country when it comes to public education, and enrollment is down everywhere, and boards who are willing to stand up and speak very clearly about what those expectations are and what that learning environment expectation is will play, I believe, a very strong role in regaining the trust of many families that have found their way who have left our district. And I want to remind them that there are great things, but we also will make it crystal clear what we tolerate and what we will not. So if there are no additional comments, I think we're done. Mr. Parento, excellent job. I cannot commend you enough. Just looking about the way in which the thoroughness, the read aheads, you really do put us in a good posture to be able to move through these quickly. I know this was a new policy, so that was going to warrant a little bit more conversation, but I appreciate your work. Mr. Connor.